down in there was
But
where they wanted to rent something.
I think they were working on computers, wasn't it?
Yes,
I don't know. Was it computers?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that was the 3D printer company.
Okay. Okay. I've slept since then. Sorry.
Trying to think of the name. They were out of South Pittsburgh.
Right. And they had to move some equipment.
So much better.
Right. I mean, and I don't know what that equipment is, but yeah, I guess it's fairly heavy, and he's got to do some things to the floor or something. I don't know. Well, there's Earl. He talked to him. I see him. I just don't hear him.
There's the father of the bride.
Mm-hmm.
Earl, we weren't able to hear you. Can you hear us?
Mark, are you on there with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you might want to, if you're on a computer, you might want to click on that up arrow next to the mute microphone button and make sure you have it selected as whichever microphone you're using.
Yeah, it's
the building. Yeah, from what he said, it was inside the building. I mean, the business.
Has anybody heard from Wayne Westmoreland? Is he going to be join the meeting?
I have not.
I have not.
Well, it's 6:32, so I think we can go ahead and call this meeting to order right now. I believe that there's enough here for a quorum. So I'll just call this meeting to order. Do we need to have a roll call? Is that what we need to do? Is that right, Chair?
Okay.
Okay. Linda, if you want to do a roll call.
Okay, Stan Wilson,
Here.
Kevin Merrill,
Here.
Debbie Koger,
Here.
Mayor Turner,
Here.
Mac Bumpus,
here.
Yvonne Wilson. Here.
Okay, we have a quorum, so if you all want to take a look over the reading of the approval of minutes from dated from March 1st of 2021, I'll entertain a motion on those.
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes from March 1st.
Yeah, I'll second it.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion on it? Not, we'll have a roll call on that because we're in a Zoom meeting. Miss Linda?
Okay, I have a motion from Kevin Merrill, second from Mac Bumpus. Stan Wilson,
Yes.
Debbie Koger,
Yes.
Mayor Turner,
Yes.
Yvonne Wilson. Yes. Okay.
Okay, we'll go on into the new business right now. First on the agenda is under A, it says rezoning request from I-1 to R2, and that's the Jasper Senior Housing, which was formerly, maybe some people may remember it as JC Towers. And Randy Cookson is requesting that for be rezoned from I-1 to R2.
Stan, that was the name we were given early on. I think he's the manager there, but the property owner has actually made the request to make the change in the zoning. They have talked about making some investments in this property, and I'm not sure if it's going to be this owner, or I have talked to someone who is actually looking to purchase it. I don't know if that has happened or if anything has changed on that, but they're looking to make some upgrades to it. Currently, it sits in an industrial zone, which means it's a non-conforming use. And so sort of what we dealt with before with making improvements and changes to that, it seems more appropriate to put it in a more proper zone for what it's located in. They had asked for R2 zoning, which according to your zoning ordinance, is the only zone that permits multifamily housing. So I think that's most appropriate. And if you remember, a few meetings ago, we actually made a rezoning for some property near there for the two homes that were down here. If you did try to pull from some zoning districts adjacent, the only thing is the R1, but that wouldn't fit the type use that's on this property. It would have to be multifamily. So I would recommend making the change to R2. And as you can see here, it does allow for the multifamily dwellings. I think that seems like the most appropriate thing to do for that property. You've got a lot of industrial property in that area. Some of it's fairgrounds, some of it, is property that has a few homes on it and whatnot. So, this is an area I don't really see an issue with changing the zoning on back to a residential nature, especially with it adjoining the park right there.
Yeah, I have no problem with that either, but I just had one question. I know that we rezoned those two houses from I1 to R2. Do they touch that property, or is there any R2 that's touching that? I just want to get into the.
No, there's a portion of your property there, Stan, that goes out, this little dog leg that comes down and goes right up through here. That's the only thing that actually separates these two residential properties from this property right here. And it's part of that old, railroad right of way that goes through there.
Right. Is that railroad right of way? Is that industrial, or is that R2?
It's all industrial.
I just hope we're not looking at that being a spot zoning. Would that not?
The thing about spot zoning is not defined in Tennessee code or your ordinance. It's been determined by courts over the years. And the intention of spot zoning is not to rezone property for the benefit of one individual, so that you're not rezoning to benefit an individual financially that's to the detriment of the surrounding properties, or to make it incompatible with the surrounding neighborhood. In this case, it already is a multifamily dwelling, and there's nothing else it could be in your zoning ordinance that would allow them to do the renovations that they want to on the property without it being rezoned. But it's like even your park, it's zoned low density in some other areas, and typically you have a little bit higher density around, municipal facilities and parks and schools and things like that.
Under the circumstances, I mean, we've got the multifamily dwelling there, and that seems to be the most logical thing, in my opinion, to have it rezoned to R2. So.
Yeah, at one time, a few years ago, your property and all these others, we had actually proposed rezoning of this entire triangle there on the northwest side of the old railroad bed to R2, but that failed for whatever reason at the time, and we never did move forward with it.
Well, I think when I was considering doing that is because I was going to build my house back there, and and I thought about having it rezoned so I could build my house there, but I changed my mind about that time, so I've already built a house somewhere else. That's why that we brought that off of the agenda. Any thoughts of what you all want to do about this? If we want to make a recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Alderman, is that what we do, Chad, is make a recommendation that we would rezone that to R2?
Yes, sir, if that's how you so choose to move.
I make that recommendation.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the board to rezone the property in question from I1 to R2. Any more discussion? There's no other discussion. We'll take a roll call vote on that motion.
Okay, I have a motion from Debbie Koger, and the second was from Kevin Merrill. Stan Wilson.
Yes.
Okay, Mayor Turner.
Yes.
Matt Bumpus.
Yes.
Yvonne Wilson. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Now we'll go into another new business about, it says drainage and street construction standards for old and new subdivisions. You want to talk about that a little bit, Chad, and some of what we're considering or looking at there?
Sure. When I was contacted Town Hall about agenda items for this upcoming meeting, it was requested to have this put on here. And so I guess Mayor Turner or Linda may want to chime in some on this one, but I think there were some issues with some existing subdivision streets in town and some drainage issues that the town's been having. I think there was some concern about, was there anything that could be done, or how could we make sure in the future with new subdivisions we don't have those issues? Is that sort of along the lines of what you all were thinking?
Yeah, we're running into this Heritage Estates over here is where we're running into some issues now. We've people's come back and filled their ditches in. We start looking at some of the plans that we're looking at, and some of the stuff's just not matching what the plan calls for. You know, we've got supposed to have a crown on the center of the asphalt. We don't have that. We don't have ditches through the yards. The sections of tile is too small. The plans call for a 12-inch was the minimal, all the way up to a 24, and we've got 6-inch tiles under most of the driveways. Just things like that we're running into. So the city's been working the last 2 weeks with the flooding that we're having down there, people's garages getting flooded and things like that. And we're working in our right of way where we can to try to open these areas up. But if we had some kind of something in place here to make sure that it's not going to bite us in the tail when we're doing it. There's an expansion coming on that subdivision and, you know, any future subdivision.
Yeah, in the back of your agenda packets, I put what's currently in your subdivision standards, and these are the standards that we go by for any new development that's being proposed. With that last phase that we had in the Heritage Estates, we did actually have some engineering plans submitted with that. Sometimes we don't always get those with new development. Right. But what's in here, I thought you might want to take a look at a couple of sections. I just gave you everything in regards to streets and drainage in general. But one thing is section 8.12, talking about minimum pavement widths. That's one section that I didn't see everything in there that you typically would have in there, because usually you would have something that states whether or not you can do curbing or gravel shoulders. It doesn't make any mention of either one of those. I think that's an area where you could tighten up a little bit on that, just to make it a little more clear what the options are. Usually if you do curb shoulders, you'll have a little bit wider pavement width. But if you do the gravel shoulders, there's usually some specifications written in there as to how those ditches at a minimum should be. And then if it has to be re-engineered based on topography or whatnot, that can be done too. That's one section you might want to consider taking a look at. The other section that's most relevant to what we're talking about as far as the drainage goes is over here in section 9.06. And it's really written in vague terms. It's kind of just says basically that it just needs to make sure that it has adequate drainage. And it mentions, you know, some different things here about what type of things you might require, like head walls, end walls, riprap and whatnot. But it doesn't say anything about requiring engineered plans, which I think if you're going to be doing new street and utility construction, that's probably something you should be requiring in the first place. That's going to require that an engineer actually determine what water flow might look like based on the topography, an average rainfall of how that's actually going to flow through the subdivision. And that way they can actually give you a recommendation on how to best handle that water. Because a lot of times if you end up in an area where you might have needed a retention pond, but you didn't know it, you know, after the subdivision's developed, it's too late at that point. So I think that's where engineered plans that are stamped by a licensed engineer really will save you down the road. But it doesn't call for that in here. So that might be something you might want to consider or at least discuss.
Yeah. The example I can give you on this one is one street alone. You've got a 22-inch tile that feeds a ditch, and then you go 6 houses right in a row that have 6-inch tile under their driveways. And then it's 24-inch to get it out of the subdivision on the other side. So you can see where the backup is right there. So then it allows it to build up, so it fills up so high, then it rushes down the street. And this particular time, it put up 2 pickup loads of mulch in one of the homeowner's swimming pool, in-ground swimming pool.
Yeah, and I know they've been having problems in that area, especially April of last year. They got it pretty bad. So,
Well, I think when we approved that extension, the preliminary plat on that extension on that new part, I brought up the concern of stormwater runoff. And to my understanding, the engineering firm was going to address how they were going to do that stormwater runoff. So I believe that what should take place is if we're going to have an engineer do the stormwater runoff, we need to have someone in our streets and sanitation department, or streets anyway, to make sure that they're following up, to make sure that they're doing it. And I did notice on that section 9.06 under storm drainage, if you look under the notes down there, and I've always heard this in the past, and I was always under the impression that the minimum pipe diameter is 15 inches, and it actually spells that out in there, that in no case shall a pipe be less than 15 inches in diameter. So it doesn't say diameter, but I think that's what it means. So I don't know how they got by with a 8-inch, 6-inch, or 12-inch pipe when the minimum standards are 15. I do know when that subdivision was created, I don't know if there was actually a plan on where that stormwater runoff would go. So what they were doing in some cases, they were putting a 15-inch tile to meet code and then just filling it in. So it met code because it was a 15-inch tile and it just went to nowhere. It just was covered up with, so that's, I think we do have some regulations in place, but I guess we're just going to have to follow through with it as thing also.
And that's really, if you have people there, you know, in the city department on your transportation that can actually go out and inspect this, if they have the know-how to look for these things and understand how it should be installed, they should be involved in that process, you know, all throughout the construction. You know, if you don't, you know, that might be in something where you might need to contract with an engineer or require a post-engineering certification that once the work is done, that the engineer can come out and make sure that the things that were agreed to in the original plans have been adhered to, and then sign off on it.
Yeah. I mean, of course, that thing's long in the past. I don't know who was in control then. I don't know who was on streets that was supervisor at the time, but the guys we have now, they're capable. They've went over and we've diagnosed it, and that's what we're trying to remediate now. I just want to make sure we got something in place to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. So we end up with all the cost here at the city level after this thing's turned over to us.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're looking at a $6,000-7,000 fix right now just to get the drainage out of there.
Does that new road have anything to do with it?
No, I'll take over and show it to you, what we got going on. And one thing I think is what we're seeing on one of the cul-de-sacs down there is you've got the old style plastic piping running into, and they'll conjoin it to someone else's metal piping at a driveway. Then they'll go back to plastic, then they'll go back to metal, then they'll go back to plastic. As this goes, it's getting smaller and smaller. But when you slip those pieces inside of it, you can see everywhere where it's collapsed.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be a problem too.
Are they going to have to redo those?
Yeah, we're in the middle of a cul-de-sac right now that the homeowners it's at their expense for the tile, but the city's actually, it's in our right of way. So we're actually assisting just to get that water out of there.
But the main thing is you've got to have a place for it to go. You know, there has to be an end result. I mean, I've had conversations with TDEC and TDOT. They're always wanting to know when I put in a drain. They want to know where that water's going. And of course, you have to really show it goes from this point to that point to that point, all the way right into the Gulf of Mexico. You need to have a plan on where it's going to go. We could put 15-inch tiles, 18-inch tiles, but if it has nowhere to go, that's a problem also.
Yes, Dan, we got with TDEC. Yeah, we got with TDEC, and we've got with the Jim Hawk, the road superintendent. We've got 2 new 24-inch tiles that are going across that new road that are installed now. Marvin was out today on the backhoe, and we're trying to get our track over there to get the ditch going to that. We've got permission from the school board to take it to the other side, and we've got TDEC's approval on that, where that ditch is going. So it'll actually, ultimately, it drains into the creek on the opposite side now.
Right.
So we'll have, that'll give us 4 drainage, 4 24-inch drainage tiles under that new road to get it out of there.
Have you looked at the the creek behind the elementary school, is that where you're talking about draining it into?
Yeah, that's where it's going to.
It has been stopped up with beaver dam. The beavers have had it stopped up. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, those are gone. They're out of there. There's no beavers over there now. And then around the bridge there's also been cleaned out.
Gosh, that's good.
Sure didn't drain as fast as my house the other night.
Wrong side of town.
Did you see it?
But yeah, that's why I want to bring to their attention to see if there's anything we can do to make sure this doesn't happen in the future before we take something over.
Yeah, and
But
Mayor,
I think some things slipped. I think some things slipped with this because I can show you plenty of examples of some 6-inch tiles running under. We got out measured, running under these driveways in places.
yeah, and Mayor, there's certainly some options we can do to fix that in your regulations. You know, if there's certain minimum requirements you want to have in there, you know, like a certain size tile or drainage or whatnot, we can do that. But also, if you want to require engineering plans, pre-construction conference with the you know, for the roads and ditches and stuff before they're put in, inspections during, and if you want to have some sort of post-construction conference, or like I said, either a requirement for some engineering plans, post-construction or whatnot, we can certainly write those sort of things in there. So I guess I just need some direction from you all, what all you'd like to have added, and we can do that.
I would like to see those. I would like to see those post meetings in there. Stan, Earl, what do y'all recommend on drainage tile minimal?
Well, myself, I mean, I think 15 inches is a minimum. And the reason I say 15 inches is, generally speaking, a basketball or a foreign object, you can clean a 15-inch tile, but once you start getting smaller than 15 inches, 18 is really a lot better. But I mean, but I think a minimum is at 15, and that's what's in our regulations at this point. So we just need to see that that's done. And there may be situations where that you don't even need a tile, you know, as long as it's ditched all the way through, and find you just have to look at the engineering design, you know. But I think 15 inches would be the minimum to keep things from stopping up by getting debris in there. Because once you get debris in there, it's harder to clean out. And that's something you could talk with your street superintendent and find out from him to make sure that that is correct, that you need to have something big enough to that you can clean out. Because once you start stopping up a 12, you know, a 10 or 12 inch pipe, once it's stopped up, it's almost impossible to clean out.
Well, you also don't need to put it in and then cover it up.
Well, that's true too, but that should have not taken place. So. And I think that if we turn our street superintendent loose on that, I believe that he can make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. But I think that'd be my recommendation, Mayor.
Earl, you're muted.
Earl, you want to try to sign out and sign back in? Sometimes that may fix it.
And I think it would behoove all of us to take this design requirements that we've got from Chad there and go through and look at all of the stuff that's in there. There's a few things in there that we can look at, like some of the, it doesn't have to do with the actual drainage, but one of the things that I'm concerned about is when we start saying that we need to have monuments, concrete monuments. Some of these are outdated. Surveyors don't hardly use concrete monuments anymore. There's a whole lot better ways of putting corner markers in a subdivision rather than concrete markers. That's another thing that we might want to look at also. And as you said about pavement wide, it's just width. I know that when you do make a pavement and you're going to put curbs, we have to allow, I think it's either 12 or 18 inches wider than the minimum. That's in order for us to actually put our curbs down.
We're still not able to hear you, Earl. It's showing your microphone's muted.
Earl, I'm going to email you a phone number to call, if that'll help.
Hey, Earl, also click on that little up arrow beside your microphone, and you probably might need to tell it to use your computer audio microphone. See that little arrow that's beside your little microphone?
Usually it works well. Earl and I are on quite a few meetings together.
Well, I heard he was on when we first started too. I'm not sure what happened.
I don't, I'm playing with a lot of things, but I still don't.
There you go.
There he is.
Are we
Hey,
there?
Earl.
Are we there now?
Hey, Earl.
Hey guys,
We can hear you
how
now.
y'all?
We can hear you.
Okay. As far as the piping goes, I would certainly believe minimum size should always be 15 inch. But if y'all determine, and this is something that probably needs to happen during the process of an approved site plan for a subdivision plat, would be to go ahead and let somebody look at it and determine where the runoff should be. And then depending on where runoff should be, that should be what would need to be used to size driveway tiles, maybe. Be my thoughts. But 15 should be a minimum size. Yeah, let's go back to one other thing. Just FYI, we were talking about those multifamily housing over there close to where Stan's property is at. I was contacted, and Chad's aware of this too. I was contacted several months ago about a prospective buyer. And first thing we need to realize is that property is in a floodplain. And the original guy that wanted to do it, he wanted to know if I had some kind of listing or something that showed what the PFE, basic flood elevation, was, or what the construction was over there, and I didn't have it. And anyway, I got him hooked up with a surveyor, and they went over there and did a survey getting the lowest floor elevation. And whenever constructed, they were not constructed for a floodplain. So, and he said he's out of it because he was going to go in and remodel all the floors. And he said, I've got to have the first floor, but I don't have the distance to raise that first floor to get it out of the floodplain. And I think at that point he was out of being the idea of buying it.
Even when it flooded that time, they didn't get underwater.
Now, I think what y'all were talking about originally before I got in there was a gentleman that called me today about that property next to Ridley's farm equipment. And there were two issues there. Number one was he didn't know for sure whether it was a separate piece of property or not. He'd already talked to Chris Ridley about it, and they had worked out formally some sort of deal on a piece of that property. He just wanted to know from me how far, what kind of distance setback he had to have from the farm building. And first thing I did was look it up on the zoning map to see what the zoning was. And what I saw was all R1 there. So that would mean that when that original work for the Ridleys was there, that was either grandfathered in or something. That was all R1 residential. So of course, I put him with Chad. I don't know if you ever got Chad or not.
No, he never got with me.
And that property's R1, I think.
Yeah, I was telling Linda when we first got on, if the business that was there before hasn't been out of operation for more than 30 months, and they still can continue using the property as commercial if it's a similar type business.
Well, there's somebody in there now that's got some kind of little business. I'm not sure who it is, but somebody's in there. But anyway, I told him to get with you. Two eyes on the situation sometimes can come to a better decision than one pair. But I couldn't ever see it rezoned to see anything commercial there. It's all R1, and it'd be spot zone, of course, if you did that. And that would be that would be something that just would benefit only, one person or two people. So that legally, I don't think you can do that. That's what I know about that.
Let it go for about 10 minutes.
Hey, I know that Graham had signed on. He was going to be on earlier for the JC Towers thing. Graham, is there anything you were wanting to add?
I had a fellow by the name, thank you for having me tonight. I've had a fellow by the name of Carl Collins. Carl Collins has owned the JC Towers for about 15, 20 years. Apparently he's going through some negotiations with it. He called me and wanted me to render an opinion that it's outside the floodplain and it's zoned residential. I told him, I said, well, I've been here for 40 years and I've never seen any water problem. And I said, and as far as zoning, that's never been an issue before. He said he didn't care. He wanted a statement from the city. And so I called the mayor and I was told that there might be a question about zoning and there might be a question about the floodplain. And so I'm here tonight. I'm supposed to get a waiver on the have it declared residential, and I would like to have a to confirm with the mayor that it will be property in the floodplain. Thank you.
Graham, we had voted earlier before you got on to go ahead and move it to push it to the mayor and board of aldermen to move it to R2. But the floodplain, we'll have to check on that one.
I can answer that.
Go ahead, Chad. We don't have the
I'll show
authority
you
to
right
do
here. This is the parcel in question right here, and it is in the zone AE flood zone.
It is.
Yes, sir.
Graham, the city can't take it out of the floodplain. The only way I'm aware of to do that is to get a, I forgot what the name of that is. The surveyor goes out there and shoots it and certifies it. Aloma.
Aloma.
Aloma. The only way I'm aware of that you can get that out of the floodplain.
Well, I'm not sure. I thought it could act of God to get it out of the floodplain. I don't know.
No, you can, if you get a Loma, that's a process where the surveyor goes out there and basically certifies it's not in the floodplain, which I don't think they're going to do because Earl said the guy they sent out there says it is in the floodplain. I don't know if you can get somebody to do that or not, but then that gets submitted, I guess, up to the FEMA. Is it Chad? Maybe.
That's
and
correct.
Once it goes through them, if they approve it, they'll take it out of the floodplain.
Yeah, and what we don't know about it is what the bottom floor is. Earl, unless you know and want to chime in. I'm looking at this map right here, this line that crosses through. It shows that it's 628.1 feet above sea level. So to comply with the ordinance being in the zone AE, the top of the bottom floor has to be 1 foot above that. So that would be at the 629.1 elevation level.
It's at 628 right now.
That's what this line is showing right here. I mean, you'd have to confirm that for sure through the flood study, but I'm seeing it. That's the line I'm zooming in right here, the 628.1, and that's determined to be the base flood elevation for that zone AE. So
any construction would have to be 12 inches, 1 foot above, for raised up 1 foot above that, whatever that was, 681. It has to be 629. Well, I don't remember who the surveyor was, but he, like been a day or two ago, and I don't remember what he determined it to be, but it was not 1 foot above that number.
A foot above 629.
Well, it's 628, so it'd have to be at 629.
29.1.
So right now, what is it?
628.1 is the BFE, which was established by the FEMA as the base flood elevation. Any construction in there, based on FEMA, it would have to be the lowest floor elevation would have to be 629.1, and that would have to be determined by Tennessee licensed surveyor.
I do know that building was built up. Now I don't have the privy on what the elevation is, but did you say that a surveyor actually shot the elevations over there, Earl?
Yes, he did. This gentleman that I talked to, I mean, he's trying to make a deal the next week. And I told him, the best thing for him to do to try to find out if it was built out of the floodplain was get somebody to shoot it. And he got somebody over there and they called me and anyway, it didn't meet the criteria of having the lower floor elevation out of the floodplain.
Did they
Earl,
indicate
do
what
you
that
know how many
elevation was?
apartments are on the bottom floor, Earl?
I do not.
I mean, there are ways that could work around it, I guess, if they were to abandon those and, put the flood louvers in and things like that. But I don't know if any purchaser is going to want to do that.
That was the problem. He said he couldn't make it work for him if he couldn't have those apartments on the first floor.
Right.
Let me call him and tell him I've got the zoning straightened out and see what he needs about this other one. And I thought zoning was just sort of given. I mean, I've been living close to there for a couple blocks from there for years, and water's never been an issue. So I'll follow up on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Yes,
I've been in the area for probably 35 years, and the only problem that I've seen is I know some of the parking lot was flooded at one time, and matter of fact, it was in recent history, just a few years ago. But I believe that a lot of that had to do with when a culvert was stopped up down there. So I agree. I don't. In my memories, I don't ever remember seeing water up as high as the first floor of that building.
I think the floodplain FEMA, what they go by is there a 1% risk in 100 years that area flooding gets in a floodplain.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin and I deal with this kind of problem all the time, and there's no common sense to any of this flood stuff. Zero.
Well, some of the flood information they have is based on old data. We've run into that, like in South Pittsburgh, theirs is based off of 1972 data. Yes. So, a lot of times we have found a lot of maps to be in error because they just base it off of, the terrain and elevations they've had. That doesn't always take into account development and things that have happened in the community. They've actually changed the floodplain. So it is possible, like Earl was talking about with the letter map amendment, if you have an engineering study that can prove that it's actually outside of what should be a floodable area, there are provisions for getting some of that changed. But until that's done, Earl still has to go about what the requirement is in the zone AE.
Yeah. But we're not involved in any of the change on the floodplain.
No, sir.
Right.
Gentlemen, lady, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
See you, Graham.
Okay, does anybody have any more questions about the draining and street constructions? I think what we're looking at, we may want to take and maybe look at some of these regulations and maybe discuss it a little bit more. Mr. Mayor, if that sounds feasible to you.
That's perfect, sir.
Yeah. All right, I guess now we'll go into more new business about looking at developing a public street list. If you look at, it should be in your packet or that was on the list there, it shows a draft not approved of different streets in the city of Jasper, in the town of Jasper. So. You want to explain a little bit of that, Chad, or Mr. Mayor, what you have there?
We started this process back in 2017 with the previous administration. And the idea was you don't have an official streets list. We were going to try to help develop one, both a list and a map. There were some questions about some city streets that were gravel roads that some were claiming were public. Some even had street signs. And so what we had intended to do was to develop this list, and the numbers you see there are based off of the GIS data that we have for 911 showing the lengths of these streets. So I'm not confirming to you that that's 100% accurate, but that was just a way of getting us started to kind of have some measurements and ideas of each of the streets. But what our overall goal at that time was to develop a list, have it adopted by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen by ordinance as an official city streets list. So that way anything that's not listed on there would be considered to be private. And that way we would take care of those questions of what is and is not a public street. The way the ordinance would be written too is not only would it be accepting that as a public streets list, but say any other right of ways are hereby either abandoned or not to be maintained by the town. Probably wouldn't want to say abandoned because you probably do have some alleyways that you don't want to just automatically abandon, but you just say they would not be maintained by the town.
So if y'all would, what my recommendation would be is if everybody would take a look and see if there's any streets that you know of that's not on this list. Let's get that information out there. And I'm gonna give you an example. There's one street that's called Tobias Court. That's next to Wilson Court that I built down there. I had requested from the town, that street has been in there longer than a year. And I had requested for it to go into the town of Jasper. So that would be one that we'd want to put in in the list between Thomas Avenue and Turner Loop. And I think that Turner Loop, matter of fact, I think that has actually, I think it's almost been abandoned up there. I don't know if it's officially abandoned or what. You know, are you familiar where that's at, Mayor?
Yeah, it goes up behind the trenches there. It goes up, makes that right-hand turn, and then it looks like somebody's put a mound of dirt there and it stops. But it still goes up to the two houses back there and makes a right.
Because it used to go in and come all the way out there next to the,
All the way back on.
well, actually straight across from Summertown Road there next to the barber shop.
Yeah, you're correct.
But I'm all in favor of trying to get us a Town of Jasper public streets list, that's for sure.
Well, we're outside town.
That Hart Road is not in, that's a private.
Shell Mountain Road. I guess first Shell Mountain Road.
I guess we just take this and look at it between now and the next meeting, and then we can see what we need to add or take away.
Yeah, and we can pull a new list where you, Stan, where you said Tobias Court wasn't on there. Like I said, this is the list we already had generated from 2017 that I put in the packet. So all we really have to do is just pull the 911 layer and create a new list. And that would probably be added on there.
Okay, is any more discussion on the public streets? We're just going to take a look at that. Everybody take it home, do a little bit of homework and see what you can figure out, and we'll try to work on that maybe next meeting.
Mayor, may I be excused?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Graham. You have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, sir, Mr. Graham.
Thank you.
We'll go on to the letter D. There are non-conforming uses. Discuss the potential change to a zoning, and that was, I think we were, yeah, that's something that we looked at there. Chad, you can talk about that there, about the non-conforming, that we don't want to start tearing buildings down, I'm sure.
Right. And so this seems to have come up just about meeting after meeting here recently with dealing with the non-conforming uses. That's why we have done a few rezonings. One thing we talked about is when we do make a change, I'll just go ahead and start with this one. This is the one section we definitely want to take out. That's the one that says, you know, building or structures that were not in compliance within 20 years of the adoption of these provisions would have to be torn down and made to become in compliance. You know, that's not technically legal to do under the law. It's not constitutional. So I think that section should come out. But what we wanted to go back and discuss were these provisions at the top. What you see there, you know, saying it can't be changed to another non-conforming use, that's standard language. But this where you talk about reestablished after a discontinuance of 1 year. This mostly applies to your multifamily and residential uses. Commercial and industrial, like I was talking about earlier, are protected under Tennessee code, and that deals with that 30, they call it 30 continuous months, that if a commercial or industrial use that's non-conforming, say in a residential zone, were to become inoperable, it can stay inoperable for up to 30 continuous months, and then somebody could start it up again and continue on with the use. If it passes past that 30 months, then it can be made to come in compliance with your ordinance. So I think that's one area where you could update this, is to refer to that section of Tennessee code for your commercial and industrial. So that number 2 there is really for everything else. We also talked about too, about, you know, being able to rebuild a home, let's say you have a home in an industrial zone and it's damaged by fire or whatnot, you know, it gives some provisions in here, like if it's damaged by more than 50%, would you be able to build it back? And so, you know, currently it says if it is, you know, it would have to become in conformance with the ordinance. So that's something that you want to keep. So that's something we just need to discuss on that one. Let's see. And the other was any non-conforming use, if you could perform work on it. And this talks about if it's done within 12 consecutive months, you know, ordinary repairs on your home you could do. But like the instance on Industrial Boulevard, when they wanted to start adding things to it, to the property, like a carport or other things like that, that was something that this ordinance doesn't currently permit. It doesn't allow you to expand a non-conforming use. Some other communities, what I have seen them do is for homes that have been damaged by fire, a lot of times if they get a building permit within, say, 6 to 12 months, even if it's completely destroyed, they'll let them build back. But some communities have actually put in certain restrictions, so you have to build back within the original footprint. So in other words, you don't come up with a small house, it burns down, you come back with a much bigger house on the property. So, you know, that's kind of just preference to whatever works for your community. But I just wanted to start the discussion on these sections here to see what you find acceptable or things that you want to have changed with this, so we can at least determine what type of changes we need to be looking at making.
Well, is there any way that we could put something in here that where we could possibly, like for example, if somebody has got a house in R1, I mean in I1 industrial, and they wanted to put a carport, rather than having them rezone that, we could just keep rezoning and rezoning. Can we put something in this non-conforming use that is, as long as that property is being used for residential, we should be able to give them a permit to build a similar structure?
You could do that. You could make provisions to allow accessory structures to be added to the property. You could even add provisions that says you can, you know, build onto your home as long as it complies with building setbacks. So, I mean, you can write all whatever provisions, you know, seem acceptable to you as what you'd like to do with residential that's in non-conforming zones. We can do it with. Like I said, the commercial is protected under Tennessee codes. So really, we're just talking about your residential and multifamily.
You know, that might take care of any problems that we have in the future about someone trying to get a building permit to put up a garage on a piece of property where that they live in their home without having them go to try to rezone something. We could start rezoning, you know, this could turn into, I don't know how many commercial properties industrial properties we have, but I mean, we could continue to see that arise if we don't do something about it one way or the other.
Well, I guess speaking from a building inspector's point of view, it needs to be designed and made where there's nothing gray. Everything's spelled out, because you know it's hard for me sometimes. Somebody wants to do something, and I go back and read the ordinance. It's still gray. It's gray to me, and then that's when I say, well, let's just let you out the planning commission. Yeah, it just needs to be whatever you do, just make sure it's detailed as much as possible.
On the move.
What? Shampoo.
Well, I mean, I think we need to look at maybe trying to make some changes. So I know one thing for sure, Chad, is we need to try to at least get that be the like the third paragraph down when it starts about tells about after 20 years those things have to be torn down. That's
we'll definitely take that out.
Needs to definitely come out. And as far as what Earl was talking about, the only way that I could see us putting something in there is we would just have to put something in there with some kind of language saying that if that property is being used as in a R1 situation, they could build anything that would conform to the R1 restrictions, or if it's being used if it's like a duplex, if it's R2, they could build anything that's just got to do with so that he'll know that it's not like, well, I could build this or that. You can build anything that's in a R2, anything that's in a R1.
But the problem I see with that is now if it's in an industrial zone, you don't really know what R1, 2, or 3 that you could use to make those determinations.
And
I think what I was kind of gathering from what Stan was saying is that if you were, say, using it as a single family home, you could add on to your house, you could add accessory structures, anything that would be similar in use to other residential properties of the same type use. Let's say you had a duplex on an industrial piece of property. You can continue to use it as a duplex. You could work on the units, maybe expand the units, but what you couldn't do is add a third unit.
Correct.
So it's basically however the property is currently being used, it can be used in the same manner. You can expand provided you meet whatever the current setbacks are. You just can't change the use or make it a higher intense use.
And I'm not saying it's a problem for us to rezone these properties from industrial to R2 or R1, but it's I mean, it's just something to talk about, you know. You see any problems, Chad, or anybody if us rezoning these items from industrial to R2 or R1?
So I guess let's go to this one. I'll take this as a case in point. You know, we looked at rezoning this parcel right here from Ms. Greaves at the last meeting to R2. The reason we did R2 is just because that was the only adjoining district and it was only her property being considered. You know, ideally, if you were to rezone these, I would actually probably go to R1 since they're all single family and small lots. They're not really the size for duplexes and whatnot. I would probably stick with R1. But if we were to make the changes to this non-conforming use section, then rezoning these properties really wouldn't matter. They would be able to continue using it. If their house were destroyed by fire, they could rebuild it. If they wanted to add a carport, add on to their house, they'd be able to do so. So, you know, that one section we were just looking at there on non-conforming uses is what made this whole issue come up with needing to make some rezoning changes. So if you fix one, then you won't have to do the other.
And I agree with what Earl said. We need to make sure that whatever we put in this language under non-conforming uses, we need to make sure that it's clear so that whether it's Earl, the building inspector, or whoever building inspector is, it's very clear to them that it's very easy for them to make the decisions on what they're doing. Because I can understand it can get difficult for someone to try to distinguish what, you know, what's written down. But we need to make it as easy as we can in whatever language we could write in there, Chad.
And I guess one other thing I just wanted to note on what we're talking about here, what problem you can run into is if you make non-conforming use clauses in your ordinance so restrictive that it prevents people from general upkeep of their home, you end up with an area that over time can just kind of become degraded in its upkeep because they're not able to do anything to their homes. And they're like this one, let's say they're not going to sell, you know, immediate to anyone for industrial use. Then if you don't allow them to improve their homes or make them better, you know, you just end up with things that degrade over time, and then they're not allowed to make those improvements to it. So I think for general overall neighborhood character, you know, I think adding some provisions that are a little bit flexible for existing uses is a good way to keep things looking good in the town.
But generally, what I've always found is way I read that is any maintenance issues, new roof, paint the house, anything to maintain what you got can be done. It's just adding a room on or adding an accessory structure where it shouldn't be or things like that or what comes up. But maintenance things I've always thought that should be included in any non-conforming.
I'll tell you one other area that comes up. I don't think your ordinance mentions anything about single wide mobile homes. Are there many of those in Jasper?
I don't think so.
That ordinance got changed a long time ago when Zach was still city attorney. I think Liz Kirk was trying to put one over there by the old middle school, and it caused a ton of controversy. And Zach
Yes, it
rewrote the
did.
ordinance. I don't think we allow those in the city anymore. Mac was still, he remembers it.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that. Yep, I sure do.
Well, I do know in some communities that's where we have had the biggest issue, where people have had older mobile homes that probably could be replaced. And because of the non-conforming use section, they had prohibited that. So it ended up, they just kept the old one there.
Well, I do know there was something also in the regulations, as long as that mobile home was built to the Southern Building Code or something of that nature, wasn't it, Mark? Something to do with if there
Yeah,
was
that's a little bit different, Stan,
That's-
because
that's
those
different.
were actually built according to the International Building Code. So they actually fell under the building inspector's jurisdiction. The single wides and double wides, actually, they have what I commonly call a HUD sticker. They were certified and approved by HUD, and there was federal and state state laws that said basically we didn't have any authority to regulate those, and so that kind of took them out of the building inspector's purview. What I call modular, the ones that are built according to the building code, I call those modular, and those fall under, those get inspected. Earl goes out, checks the footings, foundations, and all that. Whereas with the double wides, they come in, and most of the time they don't even put them on strip footings anymore. They just throw those block things down there and set them up on that. But since the federal law preempts, state regulation on that, they get away with it. So theoretically, if somebody wanted to put a double wide in Oaklawn, Earl could not tell them, no, they can't do that. It'd be up to the landowners around there and their subdivision restrictions to keep them from doing that. Earl would have to issue a permit for a double wide in Oaklawn if somebody came in and asked for one under the federal and state regulations.
It's always been my understanding in the other jurisdictions that I work in that you can put and I call it a double wide, modular, however you want to call it, in any zoning, any residential zoning district, as long as it's put on a permanent block foundation and made to look like a site-built home. In other words, any attachments or wheels and all that kind of stuff, everything's covered up. You can tell a modular or double wide trailer anytime, but if it's on a block foundation, permanent block foundation that surrounds it, not just one that holds it up, it's just really for looks only, but it's a permanent block foundation like it would be on a house, and it makes it look like a site build. And it's my understanding that's you can in any zone. Really, single wides in some other jurisdictions. I don't know I don't think it's legal, but you can't say you can't have them in the city. But I think my understanding was you can place them in a district. I don't like some people have R4s where they put things that don't own anywhere else. You can zone them into a zoning area for things like that.
Yeah, that's what the city did to regulate it, Earl. Zach drew that up so that it only regulated single wides. And I think that's the way they did that. They designated certain zones, maybe R2, R3, something like that, where they were allowed and not in R1. And that regulation, holds up under the state law and the case laws. That's been tested before, but it's only for the single wides. Pretty much a double wide, modular, whatever you want to call it, they're fair game. And the only way that, those get regulated is through private landowner restrictions.
Well, I would recommend maybe Chad or someone go ahead and try to look at possibly rewording this 14-206, especially down in that area where it says non-conforming use about the structures being torn down. That needs to come out. And we need to take a look at that and see if we can't amend this this part of our regulations. If there's something else in there that somebody sees that we need to look at, we need to maybe discuss it.
I wasn't more than number it was now.
I'm not hearing anything else. So does that sound agreeable to everyone? What we talked about, maybe for existing residential uses to allow accessory buildings, expansion of an existing home if it meets setbacks, and being allowed to build back if a home were destroyed within, say, like 6 to 12 months.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree with that.
That just give me some direction on what to write up for us to look at next time.
That sounds good. And we can take a look at that and see how that's worded and see if that's something we want to act on. That'd be great. I appreciate that. And any other discussions on that? Non-conforming uses? If not, any other new business, Chad, that you know of, or Mr. Mayor?
No, sir, none that I know of.
If there's no new business, we'll go on to the old business. We'll look at under number A, there's a discussing rezoning of 8 or more properties on Industrial Boulevard. Apparently there's been a letter sent out, but I don't think it got sent to them on time. So this might be something that we want to put off till next week and discuss. Is that correct, Linda, possibly, or Mayor?
Yes, sir. Those were mailed on April the 1st to those residents there on Industrial. And the date on it is May Planning Commission date. It's May 3rd. It's the date that was on the letters.
Linda, has there been any response? Has there been any response?
None.
Linda? Okay,
None yet, Mac.
okay.
Maybe something before May.
Yeah, I'd say that probably because of the holidays and things, they may not get it until this week.
Okay.
Might be our illustrious post office also.
Yeah.
Postal system, I should say, I'm sorry. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to defining agriculture uses. We've talked about this a couple times, and I guess I'd like to have some kind of a proposal so we can just go ahead and either get some kind of a definition in our city ordinance that's going to actually tell the building inspector and ourselves exactly what the definition of agriculture is. I know there's 2 or 3 examples there that Chad put on there, a sample of definitions, and I'm just looking at some guidance of what you all want to do on that. Chad, do you have any recommendations for the board?
Well, I know the last time we had discussed this, there had been some issues that we looked at around town where there were some agricultural uses that were in zoning districts that if we made the change, they wouldn't be permitted to be continued as they were, or if they wanted to go back and use them. So I think that was what kind of caused some hesitation the last time we discussed this on actually looking at making that change. Now, there was some along Highway 28 that we had looked at, various properties there. Some they were doing hay on, some were just current vacant fields. And I forgot what the zoning was on those, but I remember some issue we had done. So I can pull it back up here.
R1, wasn't it? I think it was R1.
Yeah. And so if we had taken that out of R1, like we had discussed, that would have changed it for those properties being able to do that without being rezoned to agricultural.
But my thoughts would be to, I don't know what definition y'all would be, change the definition of agricultural uses and make it for the use of livestock and for chicken houses and things like that, that you've got to have a minimum of 5 acres, some kind of acres. You know, the more land you got, you know, it's going to, you're going to be more out in the countryside, have something that wouldn't affect the neighbors as much. But my thoughts would be just, you know, something about the size of the property that you're.
And here's an example. Here's some of the property we talked about. It's currently zoned R2. I think it was this little lot right here on the corner, 41 and 28, that's zoned commercial. I think you said they were doing hay on last time.
Or is that another place?
They have sheep there.
I think
Oh, here? Okay.
Westmoreland's got sheep in there too, right? I think.
Yeah.
Or goats or something.
Yeah, didn't they talk something about 28 there too? Another piece too. And I can't remember what we came to.
And I know there's been goats on there for years, and I know it's not the same goats because they'd be older than I am.
Well, they've already eaten those.
Family line.
Yeah, that's.
I guess, you know, the easiest fix without actually rezoning properties to agricultural is if you were to leave that in there, it first needs a definition. But like Earl said, you know, we can discuss this too before, probably the simplest fix is just setting a minimum size requirement that perhaps you can move an agricultural use down to a use permitted on review, which would require them to come to the planning commission, you know, seeking approval to do something they're not already doing on the property. And then if it met a set of criteria, say one being that it meets a minimum lot size, then it would be permitted in those instances. That way you'd still be permitted to have it on these larger tracts, like talking about that going through the rezoning process. But I don't know what, you know, for you, what that magic number might be. Is it 5 acres? Is it 2.5 acres? You know, what would that be? Because it is permitted in both R1 and R2 zones.
Well, I like what Earl said. As myself personally, I like the criteria of 5 acres. You almost have to have 5 acres to have any kind of grazing area for something. But then again, you look at that area there. You know, it's
like this one parcel. It's 4.23 acres.
Is there any way you could grandfather those in that's already been used as that? I don't know.
Chicken.
Is that pinkish zone there? What is that zone? Is that R1?
This one here?
Yes.
That's a commercial.
It's all commercial.
That's Highway 28 commercial. Everything in red is commercial, purple industrial. This light color and yellow is the R1, and the green color is your R2. And this is the only agricultural district you have in the town.
When did that, does anybody know when that was changed or when that was made commercial? There at 72 and 2, that area right through there. Has that always been commercial, or has it recently been changed in the last 20 years, or what? Does anybody know?
I think it's always been commercial, Stan.
Okay.
I bought some property there in 95. It was commercial.
Because that was actually the main thoroughfare before the interstate come through also. So I'm sure that was commercial back in the 60s probably.
Right. I mean, I don't know.
The 60s
Code lock's
before your
actually
time, Mac?
Say again?
I said, was the 60s before your time?
Before my time here in Jasper. All right, Les could tell us. What about Les?
Tell you what,
The commercial property, you know, if it's been changed or anything.
He's dating you now.
I didn't know it was commercial.
Oh, okay. Well, you were here. I just, just thought I'd ask. Just thought I'd ask.
Choose your from the
Ignorance in
beginning.
absence is no excuse.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm not
You were
okay.
here from
Where's
the
Lake
beginning
go?
of time.
Chad, even if we put the 5 acre limit, that's really going to affect everyone going forward from when the Board of Mayor and Aldermen choose to adopt that. So where the Westmoreland, goats are, that's always, they've been using that for goats as long as I can remember. So, I mean, it's always been that use. And, if we do some modifications on our non-conforming, I don't see that's going to be a problem. But any new agricultural use, it's going to be some sort of like chicken house or something, we could put that 5 acre restriction on that. I think that would be appropriate, don't you?
Get the grandfather some of those older places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
That's what I'm
anything that
saying.
is
Some of the areas-
existing now would be grandfathered.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The ones that are using it now, they're grandfathered in. So really what we're addressing is future development. If somebody wanted to come in and put a chicken house or, build a big cow barn, dairy barn or something, then, we could say, okay, well, you at least have to have 5 acres to do that. And if the question comes, well, you let them raise goats, they were raising goats before we ever enacted this change to the ordinance.
Those were born.
See, that's something too, depending on how you define agriculture. The examples I gave you there, especially like even in Kimball, they don't even permit raising of domestic animals or fowl. And so that even rules out chicken houses too. So it kind of depend on how you define that. If chicken houses are something you'd see permissible, maybe that's a little bit larger than a 5 acre tract of land. But on other things, maybe it's 5 or greater.
We've got very few tracts of land, in my opinion, that would be big enough to have a chicken house operation on. It takes a pretty good size area to be able to run those kinds of operations.
Stink. For miles.
So is the problem right now that we're looking at is we don't have a definition of what agriculture is. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Because you can put agriculture in any zone. Is that at this time?
You can put it in either of your 2 residential zones or your agricultural districts. So there's 3 zoning districts that would permit agricultural uses. And what Earl had run into is the request, is on this parcel right here that we were looking at that adjoins agriculture. It's 7+ acres, and they were wanting to, what was it, Earl? What were they wanting to put there?
But they didn't want to put a chicken house on that area. They couldn't park cars and stuff on. Yeah.
Yeah.
If that was zone agriculture, well, they could put a chicken house on it now. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, like I said, without that definition of agriculture, it could be open to pretty much anything. And if you find it defined in state law as agriculture, then they could do it there. So I think that was the issue that we had run into. Earl wasn't going to have any way of saying no to it since it was just listed as agricultural uses in R1. And that's where we started the discussion that it could become problematic. While this is a large tract of land that adjoins an agricultural district, with it just being open-ended, you could have it on any size lot that's zoned residential.
Yeah, and they could have actually parked agricultural use trucks and vehicles on there too, and Earl couldn't have stopped it. I mean, but they never were smart enough to really pick up on that.
Better keep that quiet, Mark.
I mean, you know, they know it's, I mean, I don't know why they didn't. They had 2 or 3 lawyers looking at it. I mean,
Yep.
It just, I don't, maybe the son who was wanting to park his trucks there found a different location or something.
There now.
Kind of died down until the chicken
There
house
now.
thing came up.
Oh, that was just anger. If we just limit, size to something like chicken houses, I think if that's allowed for us to just limit what agricultural is allowed without cutting everything out.
Well, until we get some recommendation, I don't see of any, if somebody's got a recommendation on what to put in our regulations, I mean, we could be talking about this forever, so we need to either decide whether we want to give a definition of agriculture, or just leave it as is and take it one step at a time, see what happens in the future.
We hadn't had much of a problem with it elsewhere, have we, Earl? I think it's just that one particular piece of property up there.
It was, and my only intention bringing it up was it was something in the future to come back and bite you. In the, you got a little small piece of property and you want to put a chicken house on it or put livestock on it in an R1 district, you can. But it hasn't been a problem yet. But I was just trying to maybe head one off.
Yeah, I understand that, but the particular piece of property that we're talking about, that's probably always going to be a thorn in somebody's side.
Oh yeah, I understand. Absolutely. Yeah. No way. Absolutely.
Well, I guess we'll just cross that bridge when we come to it. If we got a problem, or if somebody wants to make a recommendation next month, put it back on the agenda, we can do that. But I guess as of right now, it would be it's above my pay grade to try to write up some definitions and uses for agriculture. So if somebody can think of something, please bring it to our attention. Any more discussion on the defining agriculture uses at this time?
I'm just not
So
sure.
that's it. Any other old business that anybody wants to bring up? I'll take a motion to adjourn then.
The motion, we adjourn.
I second it.
All approved, say aye. So I don't know if we need a roll call on that. I believe I think you can just put yes on all of them.
We can have
When I was growing up, out there were
All right. Well, I guess that's it for us. Everybody have a good evening.
Good night.
Everybody stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.